Wednesday of the 20th week in Ordinary Time.
A reading from the book of Judges. All the citizens of Shechem and all Beth Millo came together and proceeded to make Abimelech king by the terebinth at the memorial pillar in Shechem. When this was reported to him, Jotham went to the top of Mount Gerizim, and standing there cried out to them in a loud voice, "Hear me, citizens of Shechem, that God may then hear you." Once the trees went to anoint a king over themselves. So they said to the olive tree, "Reign over us." But the olive tree answered them, "Must I give up my rich oil, whereby men and gods are honored, and go to wave over the trees?" Then the trees said to the fig tree, "Come, you reign over us." But the fig tree answered them, "Must I give up my sweetness and my good fruit, and go to wave over the trees?" Then the trees said to the vine, "Come you, and reign over us." But the vine answered them, "Must I give up my wine that cheers gods and men, and go to wave over the trees?" Then all the trees said to the buckthorn, "Come, you reign over us." But the buckthorn replied to the trees, "If you wish to anoint me king over you in good faith, come and take refuge in my shadow. Otherwise, let fire come from the buckthorn and devour the cedars of Lebanon." The word of the Lord.
The responsorial psalm. The response is, "Lord, in your strength the king is glad." O Lord, in your strength the king is glad. In your victory how greatly he rejoices. You have granted him his heart's desire. You refuse not the wish of his lips. Lord, in your strength the king is glad. For you welcomed him with goodly blessings. You placed on his head a crown of pure gold. He asked life of you. You gave him length of days forever and ever. Lord, in your strength the king is glad. Great is his glory in your victory. Majesty and splendor you conferred upon him. You made him a blessing forever. You gladdened him with the joy of your face. Lord, in your strength the king is glad.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to St. Matthew. Jesus told his disciples this parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out at dawn to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with them for the usual daily wage, he sent them into his vineyard. Going out about 9 o'clock, he saw others standing idle in the marketplace. And he said to them, "You too, go into my vineyard, and I will give you what is just." So they went off. And he went out again around noon and around 3 o'clock and did likewise. Going out about 5 o'clock, he found others standing around, and he said to them, "Why do you stand here idle all day?" And they answered, "Because no one has hired us." He said to them, "You too, go into my vineyard." When it was evening, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Summon the laborers and give them their pay, beginning with the last and ending with the first." When those who had started about 5 o'clock came, each received the usual daily wage. So when the first came, they thought they would receive more, but each of them also got the usual wage. And on receiving it, they grumbled against the landowner, saying, "These last ones worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us, who bore the day's burden in the heat." He said to one of them in reply, "My friend, I am not cheating you. Did you not agree with me for the usual daily wage? Take what is yours and go. What if I wish to give this last one the same as you? Or am I not free to do as I wish with my own money? Are you envious because I am generous? Thus the last will be first, and the first will be last." The Gospel of the Lord.
Wednesday of the 20th week in Ordinary Time. The first reading comes from the book of Judges, chapter 9, verses 6 to 15. Remember, the judges were charismatically called leaders to lead Israel in executive terms, in juridical terms, in military terms, and even as prophets. They had all this responsibility, but they were charismatically called, which meant that one son did not succeed the father. Well, in this particular case, Abimelech tries to do that. He killed all of his half-brothers, except for one, Jotham. and he makes himself king over Israel. What does Jotham do? He goes to Mount Gerizim and he tells a parable. And the parable is that the various trees of the forest wanted to anoint a king. They offered it to the olive tree, but the olive tree said no, that I wouldn't be able to have the honor of my rich oil. The fig tree, no, then I would have to give up my fruit. The vineyard, no, then I would have to give up the wine I produce. And finally the buckthorn, a thistle, a bush with thorns in it. And it says, okay, but if you do this, then you have to serve me. What he's saying is that Abimelech, this son of Gideon who has succeeded him, is like a buckthorn. He's the least of everyone. And this is not least in terms of humility, but least in terms of valor, in terms of honor. He's just a thorn tree. And if you want to serve him, then you're going to have to bow down to him. You're going to have to pay the price. The Gospel is from Matthew 20, 1 to 16. This is a parable about the final judgment. And this is very common in Matthew's Gospel. Whereas in Luke's Gospel, the greatest theme of the parables is compassion and forgiveness, here the greatest theme is the idea that there will be a final judgment. But there's a spin on it because it talks about workers who went into the vineyard. Some worked the entire day, some part of the day, some even less. Some worked but an hour. And when they're going to be paid at the end of the day, this was very common to pay the day laborers each day. When they're going to be paid, the ones who worked only an hour are paid first, and they're given a denarius. Now, a denarius is a day's wage, and therefore those who work the entire day expect more. When they come up, they get that same denarius, and they respond, this isn't fair. The owner comes out and says, who are you to tell me what's fair or not? If I'm generous with my resources, give more to those who only worked an hour than they expected, and in fact than they deserved. Who are you to tell me I can't be generous? This is a parable to remind people that God is in charge, and God's mercy is more powerful than our idea of justice. Justice technically is giving every person what they deserve. If God at the Last Judgment were to give us all what we deserved, then we better think hot, because one little venial sin, one little turning away from our Lord, and we deserve the fire. We want God to be merciful at the Last Judgment, but very often we want God to be merciful with us and just with everybody else, and it doesn't work that way. This parable reminds us that God is incredibly merciful, but at the same time, this parable takes place in the context of a final judgment, a final payout. It reminds us that there are consequences to our actions, that we do have to serve the Lord. Even if it's only for an hour, we have to serve the Lord, or else we will in fact receive the punishment. And may God bless us.